Chapter 18, Diving into the Wreck. Corinne knew that Cece was nervous. Cece's jaw was tight, and she looked straight ahead as she swam. The other mermaids followed quietly behind. Whenever they whispered to each other, Cece picked up speed, and they had to struggle to catch up. All at once, Cece slowed, and Noe came up alongside them with Buki. "Where did it go?" Noe asked. "Where did what go?" Corinne asked. "We've lost the current," Noe said. The thin trail of blue that Corinne had seen at the start of their journey seemed to have petered out somewhere behind them. "What do we do now?" she asked. Cece swam ahead slowly, moving slightly left and right, as if she was searching for a path. "Mama has never led us the wrong way," Noe said. "The current must be here somewhere." "You don't have to always follow her, do you?" Buki asked. "Who follows her? She is everywhere," Cece said. "As far as the water reaches, there she is. You can't follow something that is everywhere at once." Cece slowed down. "Did you find it?" Drew asked. Cece shook her head. "No, but I've been here before." "Of course you have," Buki grumbled. "She said you were going home, remember? Maybe you're home already. That's why the current is gone." "When were we here?" Ellie asked. "If you don't know, I certainly don't," Noe said. "What if you're wrong?" Drew asked. "We could get lost." Addie shook her head. "Mama wouldn't send us unless she knew we could do it. It's important to her. There must be a way." "Why is it important?" Buki asked. "Why would she make us drag a bunch of loud little fish across the ocean if it wasn't?" Noe asked. She gave Buki a little slap with her tail that sent him spinning away from her for a few seconds before she scooped him back up. "I want to switch," Buki complained. "Quit whining," Noe said. "I wasn't going to hurt you." "You knew my grandpère," Corinne said, trying to break up the argument. Cece nodded. "He told me to watch out for your father, and then you came along, so I watched out for you too. Though your father was always easier, he doesn't put himself in danger." "What do you mean?" "Rowing a boat out to a rocky cliff in the middle of the night isn't the smartest plan," Cece said. She sped up a little and stopped again at a dip in the sand. She picked up a few rocks and bit her lip. Corinne thought about the night she had taken her papa's yellow boat to rescue her mama's necklace from Severine. The rocks were huge and sharp and the current was strong. She had been sure she would crash. But then something had pushed her boat out of danger. "It was you who helped me that night?" Cece nodded. "I should not have. We are not supposed to interfere. But I promised your grandpère, and I keep my promises." "How did he save you?" Cece darted ahead again. "I was caught in his nets. He could have kept me, but he cut me out. He didn't even ask for a favor. Not then, anyway. Years later, his boat overturned in a storm and broke apart far from land. He tried to swim against the wind and waves, but they were too strong. When he went down, I swam to him and touched his hand. He asked me to protect his family always, but he said to let him go. He said it was his time. I didn't know what that meant until after I did what he asked. My papa always said that I would be safer on the water. The grandpère was king of the fish folk?" Cece laughed bubbles. "He isn't, you know. There is no such thing. Mama Delot rules the water. You land fish have such silly ideas." Corinne looked at her friends, surrounded by water, able to breathe, to talk, and being ferried by a bunch of mermaids across the entire ocean. She laughed too. No such thing. As she said it, the water warmed and Cece's mood brightened. She and the other mermaids darted around quietly. A soft morning light broke through the water and filtered down to them. The rays reflected off specks of sand and debris that floated in the water around them. "I remember a ship," Cece said. Ellie moved closer, leaving scales in her wake. "Yes," she said, "we were all on it." "How?" Buki asked. "Don't you mean swimming around it?" The mermaids didn't respond. "Here," Addie said, pulling Malik down with her. She used her tail to dust off rows of wood covered in sand. Cece let go of Corinne's and Drew's hands and swam off. The girls tried to follow her, but Cece was too fast, and Corinne felt her lungs begin to burn. She pushed through the water after the mermaid as darkness began to close in around the edges of her vision until she could barely see. but Cece stopped suddenly, and Corinne and Drew grabbed her tail. Corinne dug her fingers into the mermaid as Drew wrapped her arms around Cece's waist. A rush of air filled Corinne's lungs and her vision cleared. The mermaid dipped down to the sand, stirring it up with her tail. The pressure of so much water pushing down on Corinne made her ears hurt. It was darker down here, but Corinne still saw in bold color. The mermaid swam slowly toward a large broken ship partially buried under the sand. It was studded with barnacles, and waving seaweed grew between the boards. They swam over the ship and through the open hull as frightened fish spilled out. There were ancient crates and casks, some open and some sealed shut. Bottles filled with dark liquid were strewn on the sea floor, and broken ones jutted out of the sand. Cece stopped to touch a few of them. The mermaids continued to dive through the wreck, exploring. Buki showed a slip of paper to Noe, who squinted at it. Malik tugged Addie toward a rotting trunk with a lid they could pry open. Ellie moved more slowly. The trail of her scales followed her looping arcs as she found a small silver box and what looked like a gold button and tried to rub them clean with her fingers. Cece, Corinne, and Drew found lanterns, plates, spoons, and forks, and barrels for food that had long since rotted or been carried away by the waves or grateful fish. In one small cabin, there was a table and books filled with words none of them understood. Most of the book's pages had fused together, but one volume had opened to a page of long lists containing words and numbers, though the ink was faded and blurred. Inside the table's drawer was a black pouch that Corinne dropped into Cece's outstretched palm. Inside were coins blackened with age. They were mostly lopsided, as if someone had hammered each one out by hand, trying to make them as round as they could, but never quite getting it right. On two of the coins, a pair of doves faced each other with wavy lines between them. The other side was a hammered, uneven finish. Corinne and Drew each put one in their pockets. The mermaids began to laugh and chatter as they pulled Corinne and her friends through the broken ship, discovering more of the buried treasure. They found delicate cups that they tossed at each other and plates to fling back. Malik and Addie took a couple of the utensils and beat a hasty rhythm on the hull. The muted thunk of the spoons changed to a light clang as they moved to another part of the ship. Cece and the girls swam toward the sound. A square opening led even deeper into the ship, below the surface of the sand. Cece clasped the sides of the small portal as if she needed a moment to think. Addie bumped into her and landed on a piece of rusted chain. It must have been what she and Malik had hit a moment before. "It's heavy," Malik said, trying to pull the chain up. Addie hit it again with her spoon, but when the sound rang out, the spoon broke apart in her hand and her smile disappeared. Cece dove into the dark belly of the ship. There, crushed floorboards pushed up at odd angles through the soft ocean floor, but the sides remained nearly intact. Beams curved over their heads like the arches of a church. Evenly spaced along the beams were large, round circles of iron from which more chains hung. They were so heavy and stiff with rust, they didn't move when Corinne touched them. Cece pulled one of the chains. It was huge in her hands, and it groaned and screeched as the rough, rusted links rubbed against each other. Cece kept pulling until the link stuck on something beneath the sand. By then, the other mermaids had joined them, and they huddled in a circle waiting to see what would come up. Corinne unclasped one of her hands and helped Cece pull, but the chain wouldn't budge. All of them lined up and pulled until the chain snapped, sending up a cloud of sand and red flecks of rust. When the sand settled, they saw the end of the chain, a round iron clasp with a hinge. The clasp was large enough to close around a wrist. Below it, a white rock protruded from the sand. Corinne reached for it, fitting her finger into a groove at the top that reminded her of the curve in her mother's stone. Only it wasn't as hard, and something about it sent a chill through her body. She dug around and uncovered more of the rock. It was long and white and still entangled in another part of the chain. When she pulled, it came free. Startled, Corinne let go, and it hovered in the water in front of them before slowly settling back to the sand. Not a rock, a bone. Corinne lurched back and away from the bone, landing against Cece, who gripped her arm. They took us, Cece said. She squinted as if she was trying to squeeze the memory out. They captured us from our homes, said Noe. They chained us. She dropped the chain in her left hand, recoiling as if it had stung her. I was called Ozikbori, she said. That was my name then. Addie ran her hand along one of the curved arches of the ship. Malik scrambled after her and got a hold of her fin. I touched there, and someone called out, Kvisa. It was me. I turned around and saw them crumple on land, watching me be taken away. How could you walk? Buki asked, holding on to Noe's shoulders as she moved slowly through the cavernous hold. Cece took Ellie's hand in her own and looked at the markings on their wrists, which Corinne had not noticed before. Cece traced the lines gently, then touched the shackles on the iron chains, just the right thickness and curve to have made the scar. My name was Boima, Cece said to Corinne. A little smile played at the edges of her lips, but did not reach her eyes. They took us away. But we are back now, Noe said. Mermaids made a circle around the silent bone, their eyes closed, holding hands with each other and each of the children. Cece's nails dug into Corinne's flesh. Corinne heard the roar of wind. She looked around to see if anyone else had heard it too, but the other mermaids were still. Her friends looked worried. What's happening? Drew asked. I think they're remembering something, Corinne said, and I think I can see it. Can you? Corinne closed her eyes. The steel-gray sky loomed above her from a small square opening, and rain whipped her face. The growl of wind grew louder, and then came the rumble of thunder. There was a crack of timber as the ship began to break apart. People were all around her, lying like she was, packed close, skin to skin. Water came through the opening and sloshed over her. It covered her face and made it impossible to breathe, but she could not get up. Her hands and feet were bound in iron. The water rolled away, and the sounds of screaming voices and screeching chains filled her ears. The ship cracked and ripped at the joints, then sank. Water closed over them. It sealed them in like an iron box. There was a low moan and a loud pop, and the beam she was attached to broke away and pitched in the current. Corinne could see the wide, frightened eyes of others below her who were still chained to the ship. Their mouths opened, sucking for air that would never come. Corinne opened her eyes. Her friends and the mermaids surrounded her. Their faces were soft and peaceful. It took a few moments for her heartbeat to slow and her muscles to relax. What she had seen had not happened to her, but it had happened to someone. The mermaids had shown her the last moments of this ship. Corinne tried to shake the images she'd just seen out of her mind, the cracking boards, the chains, and most of all, the people who had drowned in the wreck. She felt a hand squeezing her own, Malik. Even before he asked, "What did you see?" she knew his question. She had grown accustomed to reading his expressions. They drowned, she said, right here in this ship. Then how did they get like this? Buki asked. Mama Jalot saved them, said Corinne. That doesn't sound like Mama Jalot, Buki said. She's not the saving kind. Drew chewed on her bottom lip, silent. What is it? Corinne asked. Drew shook her head. Just say it, Corinne said. We can never see the things you see, Drew said. Corinne felt anger prickle on her skin. You wouldn't have wanted to see this, she said. Drew lowered her head and said nothing else. Corinne wanted to get out of the ship and away from the memory the mermaids had shared with her, and the confused, angry feeling that Drew had stirred up in her stomach like a sour dish. But Cece and Addie gripped her hands, and as much as she struggled, she could not pull them away. Eventually, the mermaids opened their eyes and looked around as if they had just woken up from a nightmare. We were here, Noe said. You were right next to me at Ababul, she said to Ellie. I remember, Ellie said, shuddering. Cece continued around the cargo hold, dragging Corinne with her and shuddering each time she touched another surface, as though every brush of her fingers awakened another terrible memory. There were so many others, she said. She pulled Corinne closer and left the ship through the small square door, cringing away from the edges. The others followed. This time they didn't look for the current. They seemed to know exactly where they needed to go. The seafloor rose. When the surface was close enough that they could all see the rays of sunlight piercing through the tops of the waves, the mermaids' faces became joyful, and they darted off so quickly that they dropped Corinne and her friends, leaving them to struggle to the surface on their own. Buki and Malik swam up, leaving masses of bubbles in their wake. Corinne was close behind, but Drew began to fall back. When Corinne turned to look at her, Drew's face looked like those of the people in the mermaid's memory, the ones who never made it to the surface. Corinne stopped kicking long enough for Drew to float up to her. Then she put an arm around her friend's waist and tried to tow her. The effort slowed her down. Corinne's lungs felt like they would burst open. They were almost there. Corinne felt sunlight on her skin, but pain stabbed at her chest and echoed throughout her body. Hoping she was close enough, she stopped kicking and let her body float upward. Her vision dimmed at the edges, going black. Was this what happened to Laurent and Marlene and Gabrielle?